Betty was born at Bird Island, Fogo, Newfoundland. I don't know how long ago. The fifth daughter in a fisherman's family. She completed her elementary and secondary school education in a two-room all-grade school on Bird Island. And it seems that immediately after completion of her grade 11, she became a teacher, because it says here that she was teaching at the age of 16. She taught throughout the province and spent 8 years teaching on the Labrador. She is a graduate of Memorial University, of the University of British Columbia, the University of Alberta, and the Ohio State University. So from Bird Island, she certainly seems to have been prepared for post-secondary education. I don't know if she did any math and science. In the school system, Betty has taught every grade, and I would imagine every subject from kindergarten to grade 11. She has been at Memorial University since 1971 in the Faculty of Education and Curriculum and Instruction. I guess we could say that Betty is the forerunner of the whole learning resources idea, since she began the program, or pioneered the program, in literature and school libraries and children's literature. In recognition of her leadership and inspiration, she became the first recipient of the Educational Media Council Distinguished Service Award for her outstanding contribution to the development of school libraries in Newfoundland and Labrador. And so, without any further ado, I present to you Betty Brett.
Thank you, Sister. Thank you, Sister, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The topic that I have been asked to address with you is the challenge of values education. And that topic is quite a challenge. In an essay entitled Slippery Slopes, The Ethical Questions of Medical Science, Dr. Calvin Stiller, Chief of Transplant Surgery at University Hospital, London, Ontario, wrote, and I quote, "A woman called to ask my help in curing her 12-year-old diabetic daughter. The woman proposed that she and her husband begin a pregnancy and after 15 or 16 weeks have a biopsy done to match the tissue of the fetus and the 12-year-old. If it matched that of her daughter, she would have the fetus aborted at 20 weeks, the pancreas taken, the islets isolated, and the cells transplanted into her diabetic daughter. The 12-year-old could then be cured." Dr. Stiller pointed out that there is no logical reason why the situation described above could not take place. He explained, medically it's possible. Also, there is no element of the proposal that in itself would be unacceptable to society. It's legal to abort up to 20 weeks. It's acceptable to use tissues from cadavers. It's acceptable to transplant. What then should a medical officer reply to the anguished mother who makes such a plea? Stiller concludes, although it may be medically possible and socially acceptable in all its parts, when you put it all together, you get this Frankenstein kind of scenario because you have offended the fundamental sacredness of human life. Where is the line which determines what is permissible and what is not? Stiller ponders. How do we know what's wrong? When do we know that we have crossed the line? Ladies and gentlemen, these are very difficult questions to answer. Who among us would be prepared to give a simple, absolute answer? Any attempt to provide an answer, I believe, challenges us to explore our own beliefs about what life is, about the nature of life and death, the nature of goodness and truth. And these issues, and others no less difficult, are raised in this essay. How may fetal tissue be used without rejecting the sanctity of life? How can death be determined? Is the practice of active euthanasia ever justified? What about the use of animal tissue in humans? This disturbing and thought-provoking essay, first published in Faith Today, is included in the controversial Themes for All Times, a literature anthology prepared for study by Level 3 students in Newfoundland schools. Imagine a group of 16, 17-year-olds led by a sensitive teacher wrestling with the types of problems that are raised by Stiller in this essay. No such a discussion can go on, I submit to you, without reference to the values held by society and the values held by the individual participants in the discussion. You can call it literature, you can call it values education, you can call it what you will. Listen again to Stiller's point of view. In pursuing the preservation, enhancement, and extension of life, and exploring the ethereal and moral limitations to that, I believe there is no question that should not be asked. On the other hand, some of the knowledge that we gain from the answers should not be applied. Now, this is a statement that the young people may wish to debate. Why not use the information that one is able to gain from whatever source? Stiller's answer is unequivocal. The laboratory can't exist without a conscience, he says. The bomb taught us that information without moral guidelines and without regard to the impact of what you do is inadequate. Now, it seems to me that under ideal learning conditions, this grade 12 classroom will become a forum for a discussion of human values in an age of increasing technology. The teacher who guides young people through an exploration of this essay must be prepared for values education, I don't care what you call it. Inculcation, values clarification, moral reasoning, values analysis. Although none of these terms are likely to surface, the teaching strategies adopted may well include all four approaches. With this subject matter, a dull, sterile, values-neutral discussion is unthinkable. Equally unthinkable is a teacher who adopts an on-the-fence position, refusing to offer a point of view. And no one, I think, can begin to estimate the degree of soul-searching, the agonizing uncertainty, the growth through understanding which may go on. Students in Level 3 and the teacher who guides their studies may find their absolute confidence in some ideas shattered, their preconceived notions about some matters challenged or confirmed. They may have to define and defend or even relinquish some cherished beliefs. They may discover that they need to rethink their own personal value system. And this, ladies and gentlemen, I would submit, is values education. Let us change the setting and visit a group of Level 3 students who are discussing Alden Nolan's poem, Treasures on Earth, from Unit 4, Survival, in the same text, Themes for All Times. The introductory note says, "People study life as though they expect to find the fountain of youth if they try hard enough. Many spend their lives measuring calories, avoiding stress, counting laps, and eating only what's good for them. Perhaps the joy of living, is lost in the search for longevity. Notice that line again. Perhaps the joy of living is lost in the search for longevity. Certainly that line merits some examination. What does Nolan have to say about it? Listen to the poem. Put on pajamas, go outdoors and join the joggers. Do not eat butter or eggs. Beware of drink. Avoid extremes of cold or heat. Abjure tobacco. Watch for lumps. Get enough rest. Control your fears. And barring accident, you ought to live for years and years and years. That is what the doctors told her. The lady did as she was told. In return for her exertions, she knows the joys of being old. Installed in Sunset Manor House, she now partakes of such delights as crosswords, paint-by-number kits, and semi-monthly bingo nights. The good English teacher may well have within easy reach, because of careful planning, another poem about life and death and aging, one by Ben Jonson, for example. It is not growing like a tree in bulk doth make man better be, or standing long an oak 300 years to fall at last a log, dry, bald, and sere. The lily of a day is fairer far in May. Although it fall and die that night, it was the plant and flower of light. In small proportions we just beauty see, and in short measures life may perfect be. I seriously question whether it is possible to explore these pieces of poetry in any but a very superficial manner without some reference to a values base. It is the quality of a life that is of genuine importance, not the length of the same, surely Johnson is saying, and Nolan too. When life is devoid of meaning, is that life worth living? What is it that gives substance and shape and significance to life? Certainly an intriguing subject for exploration. This, I submit to you, is values education. Values education, from my perspective, is an integral part of the program of any school from K to 12. The school, I believe, can no more separate itself from values education than it can refuse to teach the 3 R's. Indeed, it is impossible for educators, administrators, and teachers to avoid or ignore values education, even if they chose to do so, and even if they were to make a conscious decision so to do. Society establishes schools to preserve, to transmit, to study, and advance the culture. The school cannot be values neutral. It will reflect the values of the society whose institution it is, and the values of the administrators and teachers who define and implement its curriculum. The climate or atmosphere of the school, the rules and regulations which guide teacher and student behavior, the nature and conduct of school assemblies, all curricular and extracurricular activities and how these activities are administered, all of these things, I would argue, will reflect the standard of values which give shape and structure to administrative practices. Parents who send their children to the schools to be educated cannot disclaim responsibility for values education, nor can those who sit in decision-making positions on boards which govern the schools. Superintendents and all in administrative and supervisory positions at district levels share the challenge, as do administrators in the individual schools. All wise administrative decisions must have some value base. In the classroom, every aspect of teacher interaction with children will both implicitly and explicitly reflect teacher values. The manner in which teachers organize and operate their classrooms, the dignity, the respect, and the compassion which they afford to the learners, the subject content which they choose to include and emphasize, the teaching strategies they adopt, the evaluation procedures they follow, All of these things emanate from a personal and professional value system which dictates both what they consider to be important and what they do about it. Unless teachers are deliberately and conscientiously deceiving children, they cannot help but indicate to them something of their own worldview and something of the manner in which they personally operate and govern their lives. If the classroom is a natural, happy, healthy place for learning and living, then values education is an inescapable part of daily encounter. It's inconceivable, or so it seems to me, that any classroom can operate smoothly for long without some reference to such things as right and wrong, appropriate, inappropriate behavior, self-respect, thoughtfulness and respect for the rights of others, industry, courtesy, honesty, dependability, loyalty. In the normal course of events, children will discover what behavior patterns meet with approval and reward, and what behavior is unacceptable. There can be no doubt that the teacher in the classroom is involved constantly in matters both of aesthetics and ethics. Nor can there be any doubt that teachers who have daily reason to intervene in the lives of children will influence the system of values that these children are developing. And I believe that there is a period in every child's life when, at least for a short while, the teacher may be the most important influence in the shaping of that child's values and view of the world. Few, I believe, question the role of the school and the teacher in values education. Sloan, 1980, suggests that a value-free education is about as possible as a protein-free diet. Any controversy, and there is controversy, any controversy which surrounds the subject is concerned with the content and the manner of the values education which goes on in the schools. Few, I believe, would dispute the fact that the school, which is concerned with the development of the whole person, has an obligation to prepare individuals in the field of values and values clarification. There is less agreement concerning what values should be taught. I guess wherever more than one opinion is expressed, there may be room for disagreement. Some values held to be important by parents may not be those espoused by the school. The values of the principal may not always be those of the teachers, nor do all teachers share the same value system. And of course, to complicate things still more, there are always those, in all areas, who, rather tiresome individuals, I believe, who, for whatever reason, believe that they alone have a monopoly on goodness, truth, and beauty, and that they, by special revelation, are privy to the will of God for their own lives and the lives of everybody else. This may frequently result in controversy and conflict, particularly in this generation, when many cherished values of an earlier and simpler time are challenged or rejected outright, and certainly there appear to be fewer and fewer absolutes. What values must the school seek to uphold in a time of shifting and clashing personal and social priorities? Who can determine what should be emphasized? Who can even guess what will displease or anger a segment of the school's public? There are few clear guidelines on how the school should proceed. There are those, indeed, who insist that the school should concern itself solely with knowledge, because that's safer, that moral education is not within its province. It's too dangerous to dabble in. Moral education, those people would argue, is the responsibility of the home and the church. It's small wonder that by the mid-1980s across the American nation, many schools had attempted to adopt a values-neutral position, an avoidance of all explicit instruction in moral and ethical principles. Some teachers, indeed, believed it to be in their own best interest to refuse to take sides on moral issues or even to be drawn into debates over the rightness or the wrongness of any matter. This notwithstanding, the fact is that the school cannot adopt a values-neutral position, and the call goes forth, growing ever and ever louder, I believe, for the school to assume what is believed by many to be a primary function of that institution, to provide a basic education in moral values. Ryan, 1986, notes that schools which fail to treat values explicitly are betraying a trust in that they're doing only half their job. Now, speaking to an audience in this province, one has to note, of course, that the aims of education for Newfoundland, as stated in the 1986, I believe, document, are quite clear about the role of the schools in values education. The philosophical statement from which the aims and objectives are derived states, and I quote, "Education is the process by which human beings are enabled to achieve their fullest and best development, both as private individuals and members of human society. That best and fullest development can be achieved only in a Christian democratic society, and that the aims of education, both general and specific, must be conceived in harmony with such a belief. Those who have achieved their fullest and best development as individuals are those who, to the best of their ability," I'm still quoting, "A, are possessed of a religious faith, B, are possessed of a sense of moral values, C, are able to live sanely, happily, and satisfyingly in harmony with themselves and their individual circumstances, D, are possessed of minds so developed and trained as to enable them to cope successfully with the varied problems and situations. The general objectives, as stated in the aims of education for the province of Newfoundland, include, among others, these. 1, to help pupils understand Christian principles. 2, to help pupils develop moral values. 3, to help pupils understand, appreciate, and benefit from what is good and valuable in history, literature, science, and the arts. 4, to help students make the best use of their leisure time. 5, to help pupils understand the human body and practice the principles of good health. 6, to help pupils appreciate their privileges and responsibilities as members of their families and the wider community, and so live in harmony with others." End of quote. Surely it is indisputable that if those aims and objectives are taken seriously, all who administer and teach in the schools of Newfoundland have an obligation to be deliberately and intentionally involved in values education. Because, as we can understand it, the total curriculum must teach, among other things, an awareness of and a respect for the sanctity of human life and the dignity of the individual, a respect and a concern for others, including the weak and the strong, the young and the old, the handicapped and the physically able, the lovely and the unlovable, a recognition of our mutual interdependence and our collective responsibility for the planet that together we share, at least for a short while. A respect for such basic human virtues as honesty and industry and perseverance and loyalty and responsibility, and an understanding of and respect for basic Christian values. These and other affective and humanistic and spiritual values, the bulwarks of our civilized society, I suppose we might agree, must be demonstrated in the schools and taught throughout the curriculum from kindergarten to grade 12. The teaching strategies to be adopted, there's the interesting thing. These will vary with the grade level. The commitment, though, I think must remain constant. In his recent book, All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, 1987, a book which, by the way, has become a bestseller, you might like to have a look at it, Robert Fulghum maintained that, quote, wisdom was not at the top of the graduate school mountain, but there in the sandpile at kindergarten. In his simple listing of things which he had learned, which allowed him to live fully and happily, Fulghum included share everything, play fair, don't hit people, don't take things which don't belong to you, say you're sorry when you hurt somebody, when you go out into the world, watch for traffic, hold hands, stick together, be aware of wonder. And Fulghum maintained that these and others which he included in his list, that these principles stood him in good stead all through his life. And he goes as far as to suggest that our society would be a lot happier and healthier if these principles governed all our behavior. Surely, values education had a significant place in Fulghum's kindergarten program. Some teacher helped to establish a firm foundation for happy and successful living. This, I believe, should be the case in all primary programs. And what is well begun in the primary school should be continued throughout the entire curriculum until graduation. The importance attached to values education in the intermediate grades in this province is made very explicit in the report of the Junior High Reorganization Committee, December 1986. If you haven't looked at it lately, take another look. The section of this report entitled Moral Characteristics emphasizes that at this period of their lives, young adolescents are moving from a morality based on convention or precept to one based on personal values. And this change to personal rather than imposed values requires the school to be aware of the values which permeate the educational system and to deal with them appropriately. Moreover, the report makes some clear statements about the most acceptable approach to values education when it states, and I quote, "The examination of values requires that they, the values, be discussed in an open, inquiring atmosphere. Authoritarian approaches and judgmental statements should be avoided, since they inhibit discussion and prevent real attitudes and misunderstandings from finding expression. In clarifying one's values, it is useful to ask what would one do in specific circumstances. But the critical question, I'm still quoting from the report, the critical question which should be addressed is, what should one do? The should question implies a belief in certain enduring values. These are expressed in Christian theology, but are often generally accepted by moral people in all societies. The open discussion should also provide for an understanding of the fact that life is full of situations where values are in conflict. Students need time and opportunity to examine such situations and to develop abilities to resolve them." End of quote. The report points out, as well, that positive values should be developed through specific content, particularly in literature, social studies, and religious education. In supporting this position, I would insist that as this is true for the intermediate grades, so it is true for all grade levels and for most, if not all, areas of study. I find it interesting that in the subjects mentioned, they don't include science. I would maintain that there is a place in the teaching of science also for values exploration. It's important, I think, to examine our own present programs, ladies and gentlemen, and identify the rich possibilities which now exist, which already exist, for values education as a natural part of the approach in various subject areas. Now, whether or not these possibilities are capitalized upon in the schools is another matter. Only the teacher and the students really know what goes on behind the classroom door. And this will continue to be the case until we find a better system of teacher evaluation, perhaps, than we now have. And that's another story. Time will not allow a subject-by-subject analysis across the curriculum this afternoon, nor is this necessary for our purpose. But I should like to take 2 or 3 examples from present programs, which I believe are values-based and are intended to incorporate values education as a significant part of the study of the subject. Now, this will be so, of course, only if the subjects are treated in a particular manner and in the way in which they were designed to be treated by the individuals who prepared the course of study. For example, the language arts program in the primary, elementary, and intermediate levels are integrated and literature-based. It is impossible, I say, to implement these programs as they are intended without reference to literature, and hence to personal and societal values. The study of literature at any level is an exploration of the human condition, and such a study cannot be divorced from values identification and clarification, from values education. I referred earlier at the beginning of this paper to a Stiller's essay in Themes for All Times, and I referred to the rich potential of that course for values exploration at the grade 12 level. Those of you who know the literature programs will know, of course, that there are other courses at levels 1 and 2 equally effective for this type of thing. The same is true of the books which enrich the curriculum in the primary, elementary, and intermediate grades. Marjorie Flack's The Story of Ping, for example, no less than Shakespeare's Macbeth, provides opportunities for readers to think about and analyze particular codes of behavior and the consequences which follow particular actions. The importance of accepting the responsibility for one's own actions is as clearly portrayed in Marion Bauer's novel On My Honor as it is in Hamlet. The social studies also provide the same possibilities. Consider, for example, the present geography program in grade 8. In the preface of the text, Exploring World Cultures, is this statement: "This is a book about the people of our world and how they live. In this book, we discuss various facts that affect people's lives, including where they live, how they meet their needs, and what beliefs and values they hold. The more you learn about world culture, the more you will come to understand just how much people around the world, including yourself, depend upon each other." Throughout that text, and I did a close examination of it when I was preparing this paper, throughout this text, the students become directly involved in making cultural comparisons and understanding different cultures through an examination of cultural close-ups. They look at issues, and they think through solutions for difficult questions. The future of the Amazon basin, for example, is one issue under study. Should the Amazon basin be developed? Should the rainforests be cleared? What are the arguments for and against? What is of greater importance, industrial growth or human concerns? Are the two interrelated? And you see, the subject is much broader than should one cut down the trees in the Amazon basin. Unit 2 in that text deals with tradition and change in East Asia. In an examination of issues, students are asked to consider the fact that in Japan, robots are being used to do more and more different kinds of work in factories, work that had formerly been done by humans. They hear, for example, the views of an owner of a small toy factory who uses robots for reasons which he outlines. They also hear from a worker in a car factory who is afraid that he will be replaced by a robot and he will become unemployed. In the "What do you think" section, the students are asked to consider what negative and positive effects technology might have on their lives. And I observed from the Teacher's Guide for Exploring World Cultures that the development of group work skills is an important part of the recommended approach in this subject. I was particularly interested in the individual and group observation sheets provided to assist students in their evaluation of their individual and group work skills. The students were asked to rate their group success on a scale of 1 to 5 on such items as: we shared ideas, we shared resources, we criticized ideas, not people, we accepted minority opinion, we resolved conflict, we acknowledged mutual cooperation. Now, obviously, values orientation is important to both the content and the approach in this geography course. And because I am so convinced of that, I regret very much to say that I heard just last week from a parent of a grade 8 child who maintained that no attention was paid to any of this in her child's class, and the emphasis was purely on rote learning and re-giving back of actual facts. Courses in religion may seem to be natural ones for values education. This may or may not be so, depending on the course content, the objectives of the course, and the teaching approaches adopted. Certainly, Religion 1100 has all the content ingredients for an exploration of one's personal standard of values. I looked at the text, The Dimensions of Religion. Seems to me to be a particularly fine text. Consider the units: religion and its place in society, human values, communication, lifestyle, science and religion. And in Unit 2, Human Values, note some of the topics. What do I want? What do I value? 3 views of morality. How do I make decisions? St. Paul's idea on love. Ideas. How are we handling our ever-increasing leisure time? When is death better than life? What tremendous potential there is here for values education. Through inculcation, by values clarification, by moral reasoning, by values analysis, or by a combination of all 4 approaches. It seems to me, as I examine that text, that hardly any topic that affects the students' personal lives need lie outside the range of study and discussion. Such sensitive issues as personal lifestyles, drug and alcohol abuse, normal and aberrant sexual behavior, the transmission of the AIDS virus, contraception, abortion, all of these issues, sensitive indeed, may be examined against the background of a moral philosophy. Even the current controversial issue of placing condoms in the school washroom may be examined in a responsible manner as one subject which is a part of a much larger concern. Information packages on such topics may be useful. But as Stiller observed on another matter, information without moral guidelines, without regard to the impact of what you do, is inadequate. Now, inculcation, values clarification, moral reasoning, and values analysis are 4 approaches to values education which are identified by Welton and Mallam in Children and Their World, Strategies for Teaching the Social Studies, publication, 1988 publication. They talk about these 4 particular approaches. Inculcation has been the most frequently used technique, I suppose, for shaping human behavior. This inculcation begins at home, soon after the child is born. It continues throughout all the years of schooling, perhaps throughout all of life. Inculcation involves a 2-step process. First, there's the identification by someone of a particular belief or value or standard which is considered important to be transmitted, and then there follows the transmission. by a simple telling, by repetition, by positive or negative reinforcement. Some may term this approach indoctrination and consider it from a totally negative perspective. And I guess the nature of the school and the particular relationships between teacher and pupil allow the teacher unique opportunities for inculcation or indoctrination. And perhaps there may be nothing seriously wrong with this as long as it is recognized that one cannot inherit values as one may inherit money or property. Only as one conscientiously and consciously accepts as one's own a particular value system does that value system give order and direction to one's life. We all know how easy it is to abandon very quickly values which may have been ours through inculcation if we did not have any allegiance to those values ourselves. Values can be genuinely taught, but genuine values cannot be superimposed. Nevertheless, I would argue that the inculcation of values is and will continue to be one means whereby the communal value system is transmitted across the generations. It is one stage in a very complex process of developing a personal value system. Now, values clarification is an approach to values education which requires individuals to identify and clarify the values that they themselves hold. It requires individuals to be clear about their values by a deliberate examination of those values as they are reflected in their behavior, in their goals, in the way they feel about matters of substance, in the things they believe, in the things they desire, in the things they like or dislike. The idea behind values clarification is to have children and young people, and adults too, examine and challenge their own value system. What do I really believe about whatever the issue is? What is really important to me? What action would I take if? Now, in seeking to have students clarify their values, teachers arrange to have the students engage in and adopt a process which will require them to examine their own lives and to confront themselves. And I think that's pretty important stuff. This is an important process, challenging the individual to follow reasoned and responsible behavior. The purpose of the process is to teach young people how to value and to support their position. It doesn't automatically teach what should be valued, though. The process is one of interaction and transaction rather than the transmission of a ready-made value system, which young people tend often to reject. The assumption is that if children learn a process of valuing through sound reasoning, they can decide for themselves what to value, and they can develop their own standards of behavior based on what they accept to be right and good and true. The teacher's responsibility is to ensure that students realize that no one has a monopoly on goodness and truth, and that sometimes there is no simple or single answer, and there may be more than one point of view worth examining, and that smugness and self-righteousness are not characteristics to be envied. It must be the teacher's role, I believe, to foster particular moral values by setting the stage, by creating the learning situation, by selecting the curriculum content where such values will surface for discussion. The teacher's own values, shared with students as a part of the open exchange of ideas, may be a very influential part of that process. The difficulty that some educators have in adopting the values clarification approach to values education is that it appears to be values neutral. What it does advocate, however, is that it advocates a multi-phase valuing process, focusing upon choosing, prizing, and acting. Children are encouraged to make choices freely, to explore and to weigh alternatives. They're encouraged to consider what they prize and cherish, and they are provided opportunities to affirm their choices to others. And in the final stages, they are encouraged to act in accordance with their choices. I'd be reluctant personally to recommend the values clarification approach as an only or a major approach to values education, because I have some serious reservations about even the tacit acceptance of all moral beliefs as being equally valid. I also have some questions about the ability or the willingness of all teachers to become appropriately involved in this kind of a process. Nevertheless, I see much merit in this approach as one of a number to be adopted across the grades and across the curriculum. I believe the strong argument in favor of this approach is that it provides opportunities for young people to examine their own behavior and make commitment to some personal code of ethics. Now, the moral reasoning approach is derived, of course, from the work of Lawrence Kohlberg, with whose work many of you will be familiar, and Kohlberg's theory of how children learn to reason morally. Moral development in the child begins, Kohlberg believed, with the childish stage of obedience through punishment enforced by an adult. It reaches a mature, sophisticated reason stage characterized by a concern for universal principles, especially the principled sense of justice. And in between, you have all the developmental stages, including a seeking for satisfaction of one's own needs, and then an understanding and an acceptance of cooperative behavior with the good of all at heart, attempting to live as a responsible member of community and society through responsible moral behavior, developing and refining moral principles which guide personal behavior. This last stage, of course, the development and refining of moral principles to guide personal behavior, that's the one that gives shape and direction to all decision-making. Moral reasoning focuses upon the justification of one's personal values orientation. And in this approach to values building, teachers often involve students in an examination of moral dilemmas, problems, if you like, and have them engage in more and more complex matters of moral reasoning. In the values analysis approach, the emphasis, of course, is on the analysis. Careful, rational, intentional. The idea is to examine all matters concerning values in the light of reason, as rationally and as unemotionally as possible. And in this particular approach, students are encouraged to refrain from taking any position until they've thoroughly analyzed the issue. Such analysis will normally involve the student in working through a number of stages or tasks, beginning with an identification of the issue, clarification of the value question, and ending then, of course, with decision-making, conscious decision-making. These stages or tasks would be so ordered that in the final analysis, the students would arrive at their own decisions independent of the teacher's influence, although that influence may have been a part of the analysis. I would maintain that the influence of the teacher, both as guide to values clarification, moral reasoning, and values analysis, and as role model, may be both powerful and permanent. It's apparent that while these four approaches and others that may be discussed all have particular points of emphasis, they have much in common. There are aspects of all of them in play most of the time in the best classrooms where the approach to values education is intentional as well as implicit and multidimensional. No course in values education, by whatever name it may be called, I believe, will ever take the place of that all-pervasive moral tone which should and may characterize the school and its programs. This tone may depend as much on the personality and character of the administrators and teachers as it does on the subject content of the curriculum, perhaps more. And when I say what I will say next, I know I leave myself open to a great deal of criticism. I'll say it anyway. I do not believe that a required course based on the science, technology, society theme will ensure that students will become sensitive to the importance of preserving and defending human values in an age of technology. I'm referring, of course, to Recommendation 12 in the report of the Task Force on Mathematics and Science Education. I do not believe that such a course will ensure that. I believe we have the possibilities already available through subjects in the curriculum. Stiller's essay, for example, Slippery Slopes, the Ethical Questions of Medical Science, with which I started this paper, deals precisely with this in the literature class, as does Harris Stone's little picture book, The Last Free Bird, in the kindergarten class. We need, I believe, to be much more aware of the integration that is possible among the subject areas that we have. I don't believe it is necessary for us to be constantly proliferating subjects. I think we might better serve our purpose if we use the courses that we have, as many of them were designed to be used in the first place. Likewise, I feel no confidence whatever that a required course in values education will ensure that students will develop their own value system around basic human, moral, and spiritual principles. In each case, learning about and living through may be quite different matters. Moreover, explicit courses in values education or religious education taught by teachers who neither hold nor manifest the values which are the subject of the study may do little more than make a mockery of matters of consequence. What we do may speak so loudly that students may not hear a word we say. Teachers, I believe, must help young people develop and refine a process for valuing. They must also help them to see and understand and appreciate those things that are worth valuing. This, I believe, is the challenge of values education. And I dare to say that there is a very serious implication here for teacher selection. Teacher selection is a critical part of the challenge of values education. In a recent sermon addressed to his home congregation on September the 7th, 1989, the Reverend Dr. Wallace Baker, a distinguished Newfoundland churchman, described what he called a new kind of teaching. An approach to teaching demonstrated so effectively by a simple teacher from Galilee, one Jesus of Nazareth. In his own time, those who heard him were generally astonished because he taught as one who had authority. His teaching was not merely a transmission of the rules and rituals of religion. He knew all of these, but he dared to reject them when they did not take into account the needs of the people in the audience. He looked out in love and compassion upon the struggling, suffering masses of people who were there searching for something, and in confidence and in courage he said, "It was said by them of old, but I say." And by his words and deeds, he challenged his followers to new interpretations of human life, to new interpretations of human interaction. I find Dr. Baker's thesis very interesting. And in the elaboration of his treatise, Baker reasoned that this teacher brought a new approach to teaching because, A, his teaching involved commitment, not merely comment. B, he regarded his listeners with concern, never contempt. He offered cures for ills, alternative solutions. He offered an alternative lifestyle a vision of another way, the choice remained the individual's to make. As educators chart a course for those troubled and turbulent times, they may do well, I believe, to take a close look at that teacher, the new kind of teaching he adopted, and the value systems that he demonstrated in daily encounters in the marketplace, no less than in the synagogue. And now I will end. The French author Camus wrote in his introduction to his novel, The Rebel, 1954, "If we believe in nothing, if nothing has any meaning, and if we can affirm no values whatever, then everything is possible and nothing has any importance. There is no pro or con. The murderer is neither right nor wrong. We are free to stoke the crematory fires or to devote ourselves to the cure of lepers. Evil or virtue are mere chance or caprice." The world that Camus describes is not, I believe, the kind of world that we covet for the young people who occupy our classrooms. A value-neutral society, a society in which everything is possible and nothing has any importance, frightens us, doesn't it, by the horrors of our own imaginings, by the horrors of its possibilities. Our imaginings, as well as our personal convictions, compel us to come down strongly on the side of certain moral values which we wish to uphold and to transmit to succeeding generations. To do so challenges the best that is within us personally and professionally. When I was still in high school, a student I mean, something happened one day, and that's a long time ago. Something happened one day that I have never forgotten. And I thought of it as I was preparing this paper. Some of the members of the class had been thoughtless, I'm sure I was among them, but been thoughtless and irresponsible. And during recess period, some things had been done which were in contravention of the unwritten code of ethics which governed our teacher-pupil relationship in that particular class. The details have long been forgotten, but the teacher's approach to our human failing is what I remember and what I would like to share now. She was obviously bitterly disappointed in us. She made that quite clear. But there was no sign of anger. Actually, her anger would have been much easier to deal with. We could have dismissed that quickly. She was going to share with us, she told us, the words of a very good and decent man. She asked us to get out our notebooks and to write the words in a safe place so that we could examine them at our leisure. Perhaps they would help us in making some decisions in the future, she told us. They may help you determine the kind of people you want to become, she said. And she dictated the following. Whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. The incident was never referred to again. But for me, no course in values education could have ever had the impact of that particular teacher's response to a classroom situation. Those words of St. Paul, which of course are found in his letter to the Philippians at the 4th chapter and the 8th verse, were engraved indelibly on my mind for all time. What then do we do? To be steadfast in pursuit of the common good, to practice communal responsibility, to hold principles because they have been consciously and conscientiously chosen, to teach with confidence and courage, to champion unpopular positions when conscience so dictates, to communicate one's personal position, but to be ready to hear divergent views, to provide opportunities for learners to examine and evaluate their own standards of behavior, and to demonstrate in our classrooms an active concern for individuals and their development as the best human beings they can become, and to create in our schools and in our classrooms an atmosphere where human, moral, and spiritual values will be both honored and manifested. These, I believe, are some of the challenges which teachers share in their commitment to values education. And it is no easy task.